This is just the beginning.
Welcome to AI's Industrial Revolution, our virtual event. I'm Bryan Walsh, feature correspondent at Axios, and I'm coming to you from New York, New York. Thank you to Beyond Limits for making this conversation possible on how artificial intelligence is revolutionizing technological solutions to industrialized economies. Welcome to our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and on Axios.com. Join the conversation today on Twitter with @Axios and #AxiosEvents. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll discuss how companies and governments are integrating AI to modernize efficient systems in society, ranging from city management, public health, to clean energy manufacturing. Our first guest is the Mayor of Pittsburgh, Mayor William Peduto, joining us from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Mayor, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So, both perception and stats really show that AI investment tends to concentrate in the US in a few big hubs in the Bay Area, for instance, or New York. But Pittsburgh has really managed to carve out a regional identity as a tech hub in robotics and autonomous driving and more. How have you been able to do that?
Well, I think the key ingredient behind any type of innovation within a city is having a hub of research and R&D. In Pittsburgh's case, it's having two large research universities, Carnegie Mellon University and the University of Pittsburgh. With AI and software engineering and robotics, Carnegie Mellon has been the hub of those three different industries for over 40 years. AI began back in the 1970s at Carnegie Mellon University, and through the past 4 decades has grown into many different fields. And as a city, we've partnered with Carnegie Mellon University and have been able to utilize our city as an urban lab and to use the university as our R&D department.
Talking about both using the city as a lab and also that importance of that basic R&D, I mean, Pittsburgh is really also a center for autonomous driving. You have companies actually testing that out on the city streets. As a mayor, how are you trying to guide the development of this technology in a way that works both for the companies themselves, but also creates a better Pittsburgh, I suppose?
Well, as a government and as governments across the world, we're risk averse. Government really isn't the place where you take risks. You try to minimize the amount of risk that you take. Entrepreneurs, startups, and universities are the risk takers. So there isn't a direct matchup. You need to be able to understand that agencies and regulations do not come first. If you want to see technology and industry advance, you're going to have to take a leap of faith in working with those types of industry. So if you take an industry like autonomous vehicles, you can't wait for all of the regulations to be in place before allowing pilot programs to begin. Pittsburgh was the first city in the world to have autonomous vehicles on call on our streets. And we did that through basically MOUs between our universities, between different industries, and an understanding that we would work through the details as we built out those types of agreements. Those cities that are willing to take that risk are the cities that will build those industries in the future. Those cities that are unwilling to take those risks are the cities that will be left behind.
One area on that matching up the risks and the benefits that come with these kind of new emerging technologies, I mean, Pittsburgh, will be hosting the inaugural launch of the EUUS Trade and Technology Council in late September. What do you expect to be discussed there, and how can you work together with other cities to make sure you hit that balance, that cities get the most out of this technology while trying, again, to minimize those downsides?
Well, a lot of the discussion that will occur in Pittsburgh will be based around national types of initiatives and creating national types of standards. What I'm hoping is that there will also be a discussion on the sub-national level, what cities can bring to this discussion. And in particular, what cities like Pittsburgh, like Eindhoven, and others that are centers of research and development can do at the local scale to be able to pilot change in order to be able to create systems and networks that then can be used at a national scale. One of the industries that I think that really need to be looked at and needs to start at a local level is how we can incorporate AI for good in order to be able to understand what the rules and regulations should be for artificial intelligence as we consume it on a daily basis through social media and other means. When we eat food, there are rules that are in place about what can be placed into that food. And we work on an international basis to secure and make sure people are safe. There are health codes that are established on an international basis, and we work together as nations in order to be able to do it. But as we consume information, we have no rules in place as to how that information is created through algorithms and how those algorithms can actually make it so that the way that we consume has a direct effect on the way that we think. And as we have this conversation, I'm very hopeful that we'll start to have that conversation in how cities like Pittsburgh and Montreal and Geneva have already started through their research facilities to be able to look at how those algorithms can have a negative outcome or can have a positive outcome.
How does the city government itself really use AI, use data science to drive policy and just performance on a daily basis? I know you have the Department of Innovation and Performance, which sounds really interesting, but just how you as mayor are actually able to use these technologies.
We created the Department of Innovation and Performance first around Six Sigma and looking at how we could look at key performance indicators and be able to create and outperform the way that we had done things in the past. But then we started to grow from it, understanding that we could adopt and work with our universities in adopting AI into our operations, something we had never done before. So first crack, we worked on transportation and working with the U.S. Department of Transportation and the Smart Cities Initiative, we began creating traffic signals that actually could learn. Traffic signals that were created with algorithms and sensors that could make our streets safer, that could reduce idling time by 34%. And then we started thinking about other operations within the city. We've created and put sensors on our trucks in order to be able to determine the condition of our roads and creating a priority-based system in order to determine what streets had the priority for paving. We started to monitor and look at our hillsides in order to determine where the most prone areas for landslides were as we saw greater rainstorms as a result of climate change. And we even began a system pulling big data together in order to be able to determine where the most likely fires were to occur within the cities, and then sending our firefighters out in order to be able to look at those buildings and take precautionary measures in order to minimize the potential for fires occurring there.
How could the infrastructure bill that's currently in Congress right now impact your ability to carry out those goals? Now, obviously, a lot of the spending is on roads, bridges, things like that, hard infrastructure, but is there more funding or something you'd like to see as well that would go towards these kind of data-driven initiatives?
Well, there's a ton. And I think that we have an administration that's looking forward at infrastructure in ways that we hadn't in the past. So it's not simply repairing the bridges and taking the lead out of the pipes. It's understanding that as we face these challenges from climate change, we need to utilize technology in order to be able to get even more out of the dollars that we're putting in. If you look at Secretary Pete at Transportation, what he did as Mayor Pete in South Bend. He worked with Notre Dame and created a system within their sewer line system that put sensors throughout the system and then was able to control the flow in different areas as the rain would go over South Bend so that they didn't have to tear up the whole system and put in bigger pipes. Using that type of technology and that type of science behind the present system saved the taxpayers of South Bend tens of millions of dollars and was able to solve that same problem with a new solution. I think that this infrastructure bill looks to do that, but at a national scale.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a really fascinating conversation. Just want to offer my thanks to Mayor Peduto of Pittsburgh. And next, we have a view from the top segment with my colleague, Senior Vice President of Product and Technology at Axios, Melanie Colton.
Thanks, Brian. I'm Melanie Colton, SVP for Product and Technology at Axios. Our next guest is the CEO and founder of Beyond Limits, AJ Abdallah, joining us from Los Angeles, California.
Thank you for having me, Melanie. Good to be here.
Glad you're with us. Now, could you give us a smart brevity overview of what Beyond Limits does and which industries you're working to impact?
Beyond Limits is an artificial intelligence company based in the greater Los Angeles area with legacy and heritage from the unmanned space program here at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. The team that developed the technology for Beyond Limits came from JPL, where they developed the technology to handle challenges facing the unmanned space program. And what we're doing at Beyond Limits is we're bringing those capabilities and technologies to solve complex problems here on Earth. For example, the energy sector, healthcare, and fintech.
So we're talking today about how AI is revolutionizing systems, and we're really excited to get your perspective. So what do you think has prompted this need for evolution in AI?
Well, on one hand is the limitations of the current state of the art of AI, or what we call traditional AI. Up until now, AI has only been applied to data-centric problems, mainly numeric AI, machine learning, and deep learning techniques. Although we were very successful in solving many problems with this approach, we're beginning to see a different class of problems where this approach, the machine learning approach alone, cannot solve those problems. What we're seeing and what we're doing here at Beyond Limit is we see the evolution of AI will center around cognitive reasoning. This will enhance the numeric AI applications. This hybrid approach to AI allow us to really solve more complex problems, more challenging problems by combining the data-driven approach with embedded human knowledge.
So as AI expands across industries and Beyond Limits is working to tackle this balance of automated solutions with human-like powers of reasoning, how do you approach that?
We at Beyond Limits, our solutions are powered by cognitive AI. Again, that hybrid approach that combines the embedded human knowledge and experiences with the data, with the machine learning techniques. Our solutions are built with protection. Our AI systems are always explainable, they're transparent. The end user can always look into how we arrive to the answer. All of our outputs include an audit trail, so you can go back and see step by step how we arrive to the answer, which ultimately is going to build a trust with the end user.
Now, AI is starting to integrate across industries that the average person may not even be aware of. So what new industries has Beyond Limits collaborated with to bring AI technologies and their benefits to that you're specifically excited about?
Well, At Beyond Limits, we're focusing on providing AI solutions for industries that basically have an impact of millions of lives. For example, healthcare, fintech, energy, and also more broadly across industries supporting sustainability initiatives. In healthcare, AI is bringing a lot of value to the table. But we believe that it's not enough or it's not sufficient just to provide the healthcare provider with an answer. It's also important to explain to the healthcare provider to provide that trust factor, how we arrive to the answer, and provide them with an audit trail. In fintech, we're excited about the potential global opportunity, especially for the unbanked in the underdeveloped countries where they don't have access to cash or banks. We see AI playing a significant role to really replace the infrastructure to allow them to create billions of dollars of market with access to e-commerce and e-currency. And lastly, I want to add that we are excited about industries where we see acceleration of adoption of AI to really look at improving sustainability. For example, is smart cities, where we see creation of millions of jobs, improving the quality of life, improving efficiency in the system, lowering the carbon footprint, really eliminating waste. This is a very exciting area for us.
So this is a technology that's continuously evolving, and we're discovering new and efficient ways to operate it. How would you suggest that leaders approach this and their ability to invest in the infrastructure, regardless of whether it may need constant updates?
So 60% of CEOs, and myself included, believe that AI will have a larger impact than the internet. So let's start with that. I personally think that constant updates is not a bad thing. It means one potentially is improving the system. It's making the system better, smarter, faster, potentially cheaper. What is not desirable is the degree of effort that is required to install these updates. We want to make sure that it has minimum impact on the end user. You're not getting third-party vendors involved. So AI systems that build to be flexible and agile will continue to operate in the future. The other thing I want to mention is AI will always be evolving, and getting better, okay? It is important for us when we invest in building our infrastructure to make sure it's compatible with AI and digital technologies, because we will be setting ourselves for success and for the future.
Well, AJ, it's been a pleasure to speak with you, and we thank you so much for joining us with Axios.
Thank you, Melanie. Glad to be here.
And thank you to Beyond Limits for sponsoring. And now back to you, Bryan.
Thanks, Melanie. Our final guest is Sameer Sharma, Intel's Global GM on IOT Solutions, joining us from Santa Clara, California. Sameer, thanks for being with us.
Bryan, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure.
Great. Let's start. What is Intel's role when it comes to working with cities to really harness AI in a way that enhances public health, public safety, sustainability, and more?
Bryan, the way to think about this is Intel is providing the technology underpinnings for the solutions that are helping improve the quality of life in these cities. And we work through our partners who are actually building the solutions that are being deployed. Globally, if you look at cities, pre-COVID, about 3 million people were moving into the urban areas. That's the population of Chicago. So we are rapidly creating a new Chicago every week. And with that, we have overburdening infrastructure. We also have issues of equity. And we believe by focusing the benefits of technology, and especially AI on these areas, we can help improve things across a range of use cases, specifically around mobility, public safety, and sustainability. Those are the big buckets that we see as common themes across the globe.
The whole idea of a smart city has been around for some time, but how is specifically machine learning and AI, what those technologies can do, really adding to smart cities? By which I mean, what can cities do with AI that they couldn't do before AI?
Great question, Brian. So let's start with, as people move in, there's a lot more data that's being created. In fact, globally, our estimate is this year about 16.5 zettabytes of data will be created. 1 zettabyte is 10 raised to the power 21. And for context, if that cup of coffee that you had this morning is 1 gigabyte, that's enough coffee to fill up the entire Great Wall of China many times over. So when you have this data tsunami and we are already in the middle of it, how do you make sense out of it? That's where the power of AI at the edge and in the cloud comes in, and it needs to be connected through an intelligent network. So our belief is by processing the data where it's being created, you can figure out which of this data is useful to be sent back to the cloud, what analytics and insights can you perform on it right there where the action is, and what data can you discard. For example, watching 24 hours of traffic go by is not very interesting. What you want to know is, through edge AI application, is traffic congestion building up? Did an accident happen, and what is the appropriate level of first response? Did a parking spot become available, and can we advertise it to people who are roaming around in downtown area trying to find a parking? So these are some powerful examples of how AI can cut through the data clutter and make sense and provide insights. And then when you take actions based on those insights, you start seeing the benefits.
Maybe we can talk about a specific example here with one American city. I know that Intel has been working with Houston when it comes to enhancing that city's smart city initiatives. Talk a little bit about your role and Intel's role in helping Houston do that.
Let's pick two examples, Houston and Chicago here, closer in the US to where our home base is. With Houston, we partnered with them right when COVID hit to basically fund startup activities out of their local startup accelerator. And one of the ideas was to start analyzing the wastewater coming from different parts of the city to figure out if a certain community or a subset of the population is being more impacted by COVID. So that's one example. We also partnered with them on the education front to make sure there is more social equity in how kids are getting connected and they have access to the right equipment to be able to connect to the internet and get education. There was a third example where we partnered with a medical facility to find a way to convert an existing standard medical bed into an ICU-like or a COVID treatment compatible bed. So those are some examples. With Chicago, where Chicago Transit Authority is the second largest transit system in the country, we are partnering with them and with Microsoft and Genetec and a consortium called CityTech Collaborative to give them real-time insights into how the public transit capacity is faring. When COVID hit, ridership went down, but the capacity also went down because people had to be socially distant. And so by using a combination of video analytics, ticket purchasing patterns, as well as how many phones are getting connected to the Wi-Fi network, we're able to anonymize the data and give a real-time view that, hey, on this particular route at this time of the day, we need to add capacity, or we can afford to take up some capacity and use it elsewhere. This is super valuable for an efficient operation of the transit system. But for the end user, it means less wait time and a safer ride, which are all desirable outcomes. And it all comes at the back of powerful use of AI.
You talked about the pandemic and COVID-19. Overnight with the pandemic, suddenly cities often had to deliver services, couldn't do it in person. People couldn't come to city offices. It had to be done digitally. Will this be a boost to smart city and AI city initiatives? I mean, the fact that they've had this experience, they know that they can and really need to do things digitally more often for their citizens in the future.
Brian, without question, COVID was a very tough experience for us as a global community. But if there is one silver lining, it is that years of debate and discussion about digitization, digital transformation has converted into months of action. And you clearly saw cities that were thinking ahead and had built some resilience and flexibility into their infrastructure were able to pivot quickly and provide these new services. They were able to use cameras, for example, to analyze and see if people are socially distancing. Thermal monitoring was one way to start reopening some of the airports for travel. We are also seeing people use video camera analytics for automating container movement because supply chain is becoming a big issue across our economy. Here, in the port of LA, there are right now 76 ships waiting to disembark their containers. And this number was 30 ships a month ago. So the situation is getting worse. And our partners are looking for solutions and looking for Intel technology to help automate and make some of these processes efficient.
As cities become more connected, as they become more digital, there is a security risk that comes with that. And we've seen ransomware attacks, we've seen things like that happening now. Whether it's Intel or other companies, how can you work with cities to ensure that they get the benefits of connection while taking steps to minimize any kind of threat they might have in cybersecurity?
This is one of the top concerns, Brian, in the ecosystem. And I'm happy to say, different parts of the ecosystem are coming together to help solve this. It's going to be a journey, first of all. The second thing to emphasize is we cannot think about security as a bolt-on. Security has to be built in. So as these systems are getting designed, as these system of systems are starting to get connected and optimized, we have to think about security in every aspect of the system design, including what data is being captured, what metadata is being extracted, how is it being secured on the device, on the network, and finally in the cloud. Now, one of the ways I think we can help on the security front is by maximizing the use of edge AI. And for example, taking out any personally identifiable information and only leaving metadata. That's one example of how technology can help. Intelligent use of AI at the edge can help. But ultimately, it's about the ecosystem coming together and helping, because security, when you think about it, is like a chain where the weakest link determines the strength of the chain. That's how really we have to think about it.
For medium or smaller size cities, I wonder if do they have the talent to really, or expertise to really pull this together? And if that's not the case, if maybe they're not sure what they should do or what steps they should take, are there lessons they can learn? Obviously they can work with companies like Intel, but just for those cities that are new to this, perhaps, how do they get started within becoming a smarter city using AI in this way?
Absolutely. I think I'll answer this in a few different ways. The first one is cities should absolutely feel comfortable to reaching out to us. All the information and the work that my team does is available on the web. If you go search for Intel Smart Cities, you'll see the solutions we bring to the table. And we welcome that outreach and partnership. The second thing we are doing is, especially with something like AI, how do you democratize it? Because we're not going to be able to increase the number of AI developers 10x in the next year or two. Yet the applications are going to increase 10x. So how do you simplify how developers are able to develop on top of the platform by simplifying that abstraction layer, so that as new neural network models like GPT-3 become available with 247 billion parameters feeding into them, and new hardware architectures become available, these developers are able to reuse all the applications, the code they have developed. And that is really the focus, which is through tools like OpenVINO. How do you simplify some of the programmability and therefore democratize the access to it?
All right, Sameer Sharma from Intel, thank you so much for joining us today with Axios.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you all for joining this afternoon for another virtual conversation that has made everyone smarter, faster. Thank you to our sponsor, Beyond Limits, for making this event possible. For more info or to sign up for my newsletter, Axios Future, visit axios.com/newsletters or the Axios app. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see you on axios.com.